All right. Again, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. My name is Olivia Fryer. I'm the Executive Director for the Autism Society of Greater Phoenix. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we're really excited to have Dr. Adams come and provide us such a great wealth of information on his research and share the latest information with regards to his studies and information that he's come upon with regards to autism. So, Dr. Adams, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away and go ahead and share everything, and I will monitor the chat and make sure we get everything to you by the end.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I'm very grateful to the Autism Society of Greater Phoenix for hosting this webinar. I've been a proud member of the chapter for over 25 years now, and very much appreciate everything that the chapter does. So let me go ahead and share my presentation, and we'll get started. And again, we'll make sure there's plenty of time at the end to answer any questions people have. And if we don't get to your questions, you can always email me too. So what I'd like to talk with you about is our research, some very exciting discoveries we've made about very high levels of bacterial and yeast toxins in children with autism. We found most children with autism at very high levels of multiple toxins at levels much higher than in typical children. And we'll share with you the testing that we've done and the work we're doing with a commercial lab to get the test available. And at the end, I'll also briefly cover some of our work on microbiota transplant, which is a new method we're developing to treat these conditions. I need to point out that in addition to being a professor at ASU, I'm also the president of a company, Autism Diagnostics, Inc., which is developing this test for commercial use so that anyone in the world can go and send in samples for testing. And we're working closely with Analudos, which is a lab in the UK, which is offering the testing now worldwide. So anyone in the US, anyone in the world can send samples to them. And I'm also the president of Great Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics, which is conducting our research to develop microbiota transplant therapy for children and adults with autism. And most importantly, what's motivated me for 25 years is I have a daughter with autism, and I want to help her and the millions of people with her, like her. So I do need to make a few disclosures that I have pending and approved patents related to the development of biomarker tests for autism. I'm the part owner of Autism Diagnostics LLC, and an Autism Diagnostics lab that does the actual lab measurements. I have pending and approved patents related to the use of microbiota transplant and probiotics for various conditions, including autism and Pitt-Hopkins. And I will talk about a treatment, microbiota transplant therapy, but I need to point out it's an investigational treatment. We've done a number of studies of it. We're now up to phase 2 clinical trials, but it's not yet approved by the FDA for autism. So it's an investigational method. So just some background to begin with. Roughly 40% of children and adults with autism have chronic gut problems, typically constipation, diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain. These are all very common symptoms. In the medical histories we've done for children and adults with autism, in over 90% of cases, those symptoms begin in infancy and can continue for decades. In our study of adults with autism, they all said that their GI symptoms began in infancy and continued on for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. So they can be very resistant to treatment in some cases. We've also done research showing that worse gut problems relates to worse autism symptoms. And so our goal is to not just treat the symptom, but to understand the root cause, which seems to be a combination of bad gut bacteria and bad yeast in the gut. So this is a study we published 15 years ago, showing a very strong correlation of autism severity with GI severity. The blue columns here are the kids with autism who don't have obvious GI problems, and the red bars are the kids with autism who have obvious gut problems. And we see that the kids with worse gut problems have twice as worse speech problems, they have worse social interaction problems, worse sensory and cognitive problems, and worse physical and behavioral problems. This study has been cited by over 1,000 other published papers. So it really made a major impact in our understanding that what goes on in the gut can affect what's happening in the brain. For a long time, we thought it was just a pain, that if you're having constipation pain for weeks, that's tough. But if you've had it for months or years of unrelenting pain, you can imagine that would make you irritable, make it harder to concentrate, and it would impair your ability to learn. But we now know it goes far beyond there, as we'll talk about. Just to give you a little bit of background about what's present in your gut, most people have a healthy microbiome that does many good things for us. It helps digest food and produce vitamins. Most importantly, when you consume fiber, your gut bacteria convert the fiber into something called butyrate. That's the main food for the cells that line your gut. Unfortunately, most Americans consume only half the recommended amount of fiber, so they aren't producing enough butyrate, and that's probably why about a third of Americans have major gut problems. Their guts are just starving for this key nutrient from fiber. But also our gut bacteria help provide water balance, so you don't have very hard stool or very soft stool. They help regulate the immune system because the bacteria that you're exposed to are viruses that come in through your food you eat or the water you drink. First place they hit is your gut. So much of your immune system is focused there, and your gut bacteria help you determine friend from foe, and they help compete against harmful bacteria. But unfortunately, there are also possibly many harmful bacteria that are present. They can damage the intestines. They can cause GI symptoms like diarrhea or constipation. In severe cases like C. diff, they can kill tens of thousands of people in the US. They produce some terrible toxins that affect brain function. They can disrupt the immune system, and they compete against the good bacteria. The latest analysis of gut bacteria in children with autism, a meta-analysis of 8 studies, including some of our studies, suggest kids with autism are missing have lower levels of about 100 beneficial bacteria, and they have too high levels, about 500 different species. So it's very complex, very different from one child to another. Here's just a little cartoon to get across the point that you have a huge amount of bacteria in your gut. Roughly, you have 1 bacterial cell for every human cell in your body. So your stool, about 1/3 of your stool is gut bacteria, and they are constantly growing, constantly multiplying. It's the most active, metabolically active part of your body, and then you excrete it, hopefully every day. And so in the gut produces, as I mentioned, a lot of beneficial metabolites, bile acids, butyrate, and certain key vitamins, and those go on to support body health and brain health. Unfortunately, in children with autism, it's been well known, there are over 40 studies showing that there are a number of harmful metabolites present at much higher levels in kids with autism than in typical kids. And those metabolites, unfortunately, leak out through the gut. In fact, many children with autism have a damaged gut or a so-called leaky gut. So the cells are not as tightly aligned and more harmful metabolites leach out and can get into the brain and cause inflammation and disrupt neurotransmitter function. There was a powerful study done 25 years ago where they took a special antibiotic called vancomycin and gave it to children with autism. And it's a very strong antibiotic that only acts in the gut. It's not absorbed into the rest of the body. And they gave them an unusually long treatment for 8 weeks. And slowly, gradually, they saw the gut symptoms began disappearing and the autism symptoms began improving very substantially. But after 8 weeks of treatment, when they stopped treatment, within a few weeks, all the benefits were lost in almost every child. So this told us 2 very important things, that harmful bacteria in the gut are causing GI symptoms and contributing substantially to autism symptoms, but also tells us killing them off is not good enough because they just come back. So it's like if you have a garden filled with weeds, if you pluck all the weeds, they're just going to come back. we need to reseed the gut with beneficial bacteria. And that's what we've been doing for the last 8 years or so. So the newest discovery we made in the last year is that now we've discovered many new toxins which we didn't know about before. So now we can say that roughly 90% of children with autism have extremely high levels of one or more toxic metabolites from gut bacteria or from yeast, and often from both. The best known example is p-cresol sulfate. 17 studies of it in autism. Every study shows it's elevated in a subset, about 20% of kids with autism. 3 studies shows it's correlated with autism severity. The more of it you have, the worse your autism symptoms. We know it's toxic to the gut, the body, and the brain in many ways. But this is just one of roughly 30 metabolites that we've identified that come from gut bacteria and yeast and are very elevated in kids with autism. And almost every child with autism has one or more of these. So p-cresol sulfate is just an example of about 30 metabolites we've identified. So we wrote a review paper several months ago. Since then, there have been 3 other review papers on p-cresol and autism. There's become a huge surge of interest in p-cresol and autism. But again, it's just one of roughly 30 metabolites. But just to give you a brief understanding of how important p-cresol is just an example. In the gut, it's an antibiotic. It kills off the competition, so the bacteria that produce it can stay. And there are about 50 different bacteria that can produce it. Also, it weakens the intestinal barrier, causing leaky gut. So more of the toxins from the gut can leak into the body. In the brain, it disrupts neurotransmitters. And so it affects primarily the dopamine system, but it also inhibits the growth of dendrites and the connections between different neurons in the brain. And so it has a very important effect on the dopamine system and related metabolites. But also, p-cresol poisons the mitochondria. In fact, mitochondria are believed to be basically a bacteria that became part of our cells and animal cells many millennia ago. And so basically p-cresol poisons the mitochondria, and they're the energy producing factory for every cell in the body. So by poisoning the mitochondria, you're affecting every cell in the body and every organ in the body. So you're causing more oxidative stress and less energy for the body and for the brain. In the liver, the body tries to get rid of p-cresol by converting it to p-cresol sulfate. Unfortunately, there are quite a few studies showing that children with autism have very impaired ability to sulfate, probably because they're using up all their sulfate to get rid of all these toxins from the gut. In the kidneys, p-cresol has been known as a nephrotoxin. It destroys the kidneys. It causes oxidative stress and inflammation and interferes with the kidney's ability to filter out toxins. We believe this is one of the main reasons why adults with autism have a much higher rate of chronic kidney disease and develop chronic kidney disease earlier. So the issue again is that roughly 1 in 7 Americans develops chronic kidney disease, and adults with autism are at greater risk of that. In the immune system, without going into too much detail, basically it inhibits the immune system's ability to detect certain infections and the ability to fight certain infections. But most importantly, in autism, when they took p-cresol and exposed it to animals, the animals who received the p-cresol became antisocial. They separated from one another and developed other autistic symptoms. 4 different studies have shown administering to p-cresol causes autistic symptoms in animals. What's really interesting is when you take gut bacteria from a healthy mouse and put it into a mouse who was poisoned by p-cresol, they recover. They regain their socialization. They want to be with one another, and they have improvements in their other autism symptoms as well. So it's exciting to know that we can recover animals. And also, it's important to know that when these animals are poisoned, it's poisoned their gut bacteria, because you can take their gut bacteria and expose other mice to it and cause autistic symptoms in those other mice. So it's transferable from one mouse to another through their gut bacteria. So, and I forgot to mention that our very first study, microbiota transplant, showed that when we did microbiota transplant in humans, we can decrease the levels of P. cresol down to normal and improve autism symptoms. Not fully recover, but improve. So again, P. cresol is just one example of roughly 32 metabolites that we've investigated. There are probably still more out there, but we've discovered these metabolites are much higher in children with autism than in typical children. What these metabolites fall into two general categories. Some, like P. cresol, are derived from phenylalanine and tyrosine, so they affect the dopamine system, dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline. But also the others, like indoxyl sulfate, are derived from tryptophan, and they affect serotonin and melatonin, which is the hormone that regulates sleep. So many of these are known to be harmful, like P. cresol, and the rest just haven't been investigated yet, but they're chemically so similar, it's very likely they have similar toxic effects. But basically, by altering dopamine and serotonin, you're affecting cognition, you're affecting attention and mood and memory and sleep. Many of the behavioral symptoms that we see in autism are likely affected by abnormal dopamine and abnormal serotonin. So this is just a plot of one metabolite, beta-carboline. It's created from tryptophan, so it affects serotonin and melatonin. And this is a plot of the level so the y-axis is the level of this metabolite in kids with autism and in typical kids. The blue squares are the typical kids. 1x is the average level of the typical kids. And some kids with autism, most of them have levels in the typical range, but 30% of them have levels 100 to 1,000 times that of the average level in a typical child. So in the same way that yeast can produce alcohol, which has toxic effects on the body, on the brain, in the same way, beta-carboline is actually close to 100 times as toxic as alcohol. And we found about 30% of kids with autism have high levels of that particular metabolite. So we've done similar evaluations for all the other metabolites. And what we can say is now almost every child has elevated levels of multiples. So this is a plot of the number of elevated metabolites in kids with autism versus typical kids. So the blue squares are the typical kids from age 2 up to age 11. And by definition, all of them are in the normal range. But some kids, like this little 2-year-old, has 21 metabolites, microbial metabolites that are elevated, higher than any typical child. On average, there's about 7 extremely elevated metabolites in these children with autism compared to typical kids. So it's pretty easy to draw a line and to say, if you have 1 or more elevated metabolites, that's an indication that you have autism. And if you're below that cutoff, you're typically developing. So this test we developed looks like it's about 97% accurate in distinguishing kids with autism from typical kids. There were 3 kids that did not have highly elevated levels of metabolites. They had other problems likely due to a major genetic disorder. So they either had arginine lyase deficiency, or propionic acidemia, or glutaric acidemia type 2. So 3 kids seem to have primarily a genetic disorder, 3 out of 50. The other 47 clearly had major elevations in microbial metabolites. They may have had some genetic disorders as well, but there were 3 kids who did not have any elevated metabolites, and they clearly had substantial genetic or likely genetic disorders. So I'm going to be very bold. We have a paper we're about to submit in a week or 2. We're proposing a new phenotype for autism, a subset of autism groups. And in this subset, we call it ASD, microbially derived metabolites. metabolites. We define it by a simple urine test. Measure your urine and see, does that child have extremely high levels of one or more microbial metabolites that are derived from tryptophan or phenylalanine tyrosine. On average, kids with autism have about 7 of these. Some of these primarily just affect the brain, like alcohol primarily affects the brain and not the gut. Others, like P-cresol, act as an antibiotic in the gut, but also affect the brain, the kidneys, and other parts of the body. There's huge variability between one child and another as to which specific metabolites are elevated in that child. And that's because there's a huge variety of different bacteria. There are thousands of different bacteria that could inhabit the gut. On average, people have about 400 species of bacteria in their gut. So this phenotype represents about 90% of what we call non-syndromic autism. We did exclude kids who we knew had a major genetic disorder like Fragile X, but some of them, like with Pitt-Hopkins, we know they all have this issue. And as I mentioned, our very first treatment study showed we could decrease levels of pre-cresol sulfate down to normal. We're now investigating all those other metabolites. So just to conclude this part of the talk, before I get into the testing, we've known for decades, 40% of kids with autism have obvious gut problems, but most of the rest have hidden gut problems, where the only symptom is worse autism symptoms. 90% of the kids with autism have an average of about 7 of these microbial metabolites or derived from microbial. These metabolites can affect the gut, the brain, the kidneys, the immune system, by affecting the mitochondria that are affecting every cell and every organ in the body, and your ability to detoxify. So if you're using up all your sulfate to detoxify toxins from the gut, then you're more vulnerable to toxins in the environment. By affecting dopamine and serotonin, they affect your cognition, your attention, your mood. So it's harder to regulate your emotions, it's harder to learn. And also by affecting melatonin, affects sleep. And we think this is why over 50 studies showing kids with autism, most of them have major problems with sleep. And it's because, we believe it's because of this disruption due to these toxins in many cases. It also explains the very high rate of chronic kidney disease. And I forgot to mention that also there's a much higher rate of Parkinson's in adults with autism. They develop Parkinson's symptoms much earlier. And one of the major links seems to be, again, Parkinson's is a disease involving dopamine disruption. And people with Parkinson's have 8 times the normal level of P-cresol in their brain compared to typical people. So again, P-cresol, highly implicated in autism in 17 studies, highly implicated in Parkinson's. So no surprises and overlap there. Some of these microbially derived metabolites like P-cresol are known to cause autistic symptoms in mice, and they correlate with autistic symptoms in humans. So I think it's likely to hypothesize they contribute to autistic symptoms in humans. Our new test is of order 90% accurate in differentiating kids with autism from typical kids. We're working on making it even more accurate. For right now, it's about 90% accurate. And we're proposing a new phenotype, not based on symptoms, but based on a simple lab test of a simple urine sample. To put this into lay terms, children with autism, I would say, are drunk on these microbial metabolites the same way alcohol, a yeast poison, can make people, humans, drunk. Decreasing the level of alcohol you drink improves your symptoms. We think decreasing the level of these harmful metabolites is likely to improve symptoms. In our microbiota transplant therapy, we measured P-cresol and knocked it down to normal, and we are now investigating what effect it has on the other microbial metabolites. We do know that MTT increases the beneficial metabolites. It increases butyrate and butyrate-producing bacteria, which helps heal the gut. So that's the first part of the talk. Now I'm going to get on the second part, which is our testing. So again, I have a conflict of interest here because we've patented this test Now we've licensed it to a company in the UK called Analudos. The reason we've done this is that testing for gut infections in autism is very complex. You can't easily see inside the gut. There are thousands of different possible bacteria and yeast in the gut. Many of them are beneficial, but some are harmful. The general consensus, as I said, is that kids with autism are missing about 100 or have low levels of about 100 beneficial species and high levels of about 500 species. It's very unclear which particular species are producing those toxic metabolites. For P. creso alone, there's over 50 bacteria that can make it. So the approach we've chosen is, rather than trying to measure the amount of every single bacteria, much of which we don't know very much about them, instead we just measure what they produce, which is the metabolites that come out in the urine. And we measure them in urine because it tells us they were able to get out of the gut, leak out of the gut into the body, and then be excreted in the urine. So we created a spin-off company from ASU, which I lead. ASU gave us the first place award for the top startup company that year across the whole university. We've been collaborating with Analudos for 3 years to commercialize the test. I just can't tell you how excited we are. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have dreamed we could do it, but we now have a screening test for autism, which is now commercially available. It's a very simple test. You just collect a urine sample. We prefer a first morning urine sample. You freeze it and you ship it. It's okay if it thaws on the way to England because we have preservatives in there to keep it very stable. Families can just order it themselves from the Analudos website. It tests for a number of toxic yeast metabolites. It tests also for many dopamine-related metabolites and many serotonin and melatonin related metabolites. We also look at the key amino acids, which are the precursors, the tryptophan, the phenylalanine, and the tyrosine. And a special bonus is that for 20 years, Analudos, which spun off from a nonprofit in the UK, led by two autism dads, they look at the peptides that when you consume gluten or casein, it's a larger molecule. Your digestive system should be able to break it down into individual molecules. But if it shows up in your urine, then that means your body hasn't digested it and you should avoid it. And so that's a special bonus of their test. So right now, the test is about 89% accurate in distinguishing kids with autism from typical kids. 78% of kids with autism test positive versus none of the typical kids. We set a very high barrier, a very high cutoff, so we never get a positive result on a typical child, or it's extremely unlikely. It determines if yeast or bacterial toxins are present, and thus it can help you know, do you need an antifungal, or do you need some way to fight off those bacterial toxins? Neurotransmitters, again, are precursors are an important issue, and it's one clue. It's not the only clue, but if you have gluten or casein peptides showing up, then you should avoid those foods. We had one person who was on a low gluten diet, but was still having gluten showing up in their urine gluten peptides. When after the test, they went on a very strict gluten diet, then they saw substantial improvement. So it really did make a difference for that family. So what are the advantages of the test? It's a state-of-the-art equipment, LCMS. We have an excellent pediatric reference range of very healthy, typically developing children. It's led by two experts with over 20 years of research experience on who are developing the tests, and they're both very dedicated autism dads. And so the test, as I said, is now available through their website at ludos.com. Currently, it's listed as the gut health test. In about 2 weeks, we'll also add on the scoring mechanism so you can know if the sample is from a child with autism with these microbial metabolites or if it's from a typically developing child. All right, so the last part of what I want to talk about is the obvious and hidden gut problems in autism and how to treat it. What are treatments that are available today, and what are treatments that are coming down the road that we're working very hard on? So again, I have to report the conflict of interest that I formed a company, Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics, which over 100 autism families, bless their hearts, have invested $8 million in. So we're able to continue our research to get this treatment hopefully closer to market. So why is it that 90% of kids with autism have these very high levels of toxic metabolites and gut bacteria? There seem to be many reasons. Many studies by our group and others show higher use of oral antibiotics, which kill off beneficial bacteria and result in yeast infections and bacterial infections. High use of herbicides or pesticides in our food or also in our homes. Poor infant gut bacteria, just starting out with poor gut bacteria as an infant. Being on a low fiber diet, too few vegetables, fruit, beans, or whole grains. Those are the main source of fiber. Limited variety of foods, so being a very picky eater. Reduced digestive enzymes, especially lactase, and also because if there's a shorter period of nursing, I forgot to include that here. So these are many of the reasons why these gut bacteria or yeast could develop. And again, these harmful gut microbes produce toxins that can affect the body and the brain. So what are the standard sort of treatments that are used today? Well, improving the diet, getting more fiber in, avoiding sugary foods, starchy foods that can feed yeast. That's one useful step. We published a paper a year ago discussing 14 different types of diets used for autism, from gluten-free to casein-free to ketogenic. Each different diet has different potential benefits. Digestive enzymes, especially lactase for the sugar in milk. And there was a study just released yesterday suggesting the proteases to help digest certain proteins. Some kids with autism don't digest protein very well, so proteases can help as well. Fiber supplements, especially from multiple types of fiber, because you don't want to use just one fiber source. Humans traditionally eat many types of foods, many types of fiber, so you want to have a variety of fiber supplements. Probiotics can help a little bit. The problem is most of the bacteria in your gut are anaerobes, and most probiotics are aerobic species. So the standard probiotics that are approved and allowed by the FDA to be used represent only about 5 to 10% of what's in the human gut. So in principle, it makes sense. Unfortunately, the latest meta-analysis of 10 studies suggests that probiotics, on average, have zero benefit for GI symptoms in autism, maybe a small benefit for improving autism symptoms. Laxatives can be important for helping treat constipation, as well as enemas and suppositories. The reason that's important, I was just talking with a family today, their child typically goes 5 to 10 days between bowel movements. And if you think about the longer that stool stays in the gut, the more toxins will ferment. It's just like a bottle of wine. The longer the wine is fermented, the more alcohol will be produced. So I believe it's important to try to have a bowel movement every day to get rid of the toxic bacteria from that stool, because a third of the stool is gut bacteria. So if you can have a bowel movement every day, probably have lower levels of toxins remaining in the body. Antidiarrheals, temporarily, I think it's important to be cautious with their use. Antacids can help temporarily, but the problem with antacids is you need the acid in your stomach to digest food and to fight off potentially harmful bacteria in your food, like E. coli, that could poison you. And exercise, our survey of 1,200 families suggests this is the most highly rated treatment for autism and one of the least commonly used. So the extreme case, if you were in a hospital bed for a week, that would tend to cause you to be constipated. So just a lot of physical movement can really help promote motility and help reduce the risk of a gut infection. But unfortunately, all of these standard treatments generally seem, in our experience, to have limited temporary benefit. And once you stop using them, the symptoms return. So you need to use them for a very long time. They're not addressing what we believe is the root cause in most cases, which is an underlying bacterial or yeast infection. And so let's move on to the advanced treatments. I lead a nonprofit called the Autism Nutrition Research Center. We spent over 20 years researching, measuring, and researching vitamins and minerals in kids with autism and developing a vitamin mineral supplement. And so through our nonprofit, we sell that. I don't receive any revenue from it. I'm the president of the company, but I don't get any salary. I refuse any royalties to avoid any conflict of interest. But that supplement seems to help about 3/4 of children and adults with autism. And what it does is provide key nutrients for the body, key oxidants to help fight the oxidative stress caused by the bacterial and yeast infections, and many other benefits. It helps improve your normal production of normal neurotransmitters to help fight against the abnormal neurotransmitters that are produced by your bacteria or yeast. But it's not by itself going to be very helpful in fighting off the carbohydrate diet will make major changes within days of your gut bacteria. But when you stop those diets, often your original bacteria will shift back towards where it was before. So it seems there's a need to be on those diets a long time. We did a study with a company where we tried to customize probiotics for each person. We measured thousands of species in each person and tried to choose which commercial probiotics were best for each person. This company had a formula for doing this. Unfortunately, it had just a small benefit. It was an open label study, but I would say it was not a lot better than placebo. But there was some benefit for people who had constipation. There was some improvement for people with diarrhea. There was some improvement. But it was an expensive treatment to customize a probiotic for each person. So unfortunately, that company has gone out of business. There are antifungal treatments, and according to the survey by ARI of 25,000 families, these are the top 2 rated treatments for autism of any prescription drug, of any diet, of any medical treatment. The 2 antifungals, nystatin or diflucan, have been rated by over 1,000 families as the most effective treatment for autism. But unfortunately, when you stop taking them, usually the yeast come back. And so what's important to do is to try to stay on a low sugar, low yeast diet. And finally, microbiota transplant, which is what we've been working on for many years now, is just to replace as much of the gut bacteria as we can with beneficial bacteria. We think this looks especially promising. So what is microbiota transplant therapy? It's an investigational treatment. It's not yet available. The FDA restricts it to research studies like ours. But what we do is we take gut bacteria from super healthy donors, purify it, put it into a little capsule. We've seen up to an 80% reduction in gut symptoms. On average, we've seen severe autism go down to mild to moderate autism in children, benefits lasting 2 years post-treatment. And some families have reported to me even 5 years after treatment has stopped, their child was still doing well. So based on the success of those 4 studies, we wanted to do more research, but the federal government wouldn't fund it. They gave us $1 million for the first study. But they said, no, you need to turn to private industry. That's how drug trials are funded. So we went to a very unusual group, autism families, and invited them to fund us. So we have, it's now up to 100 families who have provided over $8 million to fund our 2 current studies. So what is our therapy? It involves 2 weeks of a powerful antibiotic called vancomycin to kill off harmful bacteria. It's the one that I said that by itself alone, temporarily, has great improvements in gut symptoms and autism symptoms. Then we do a bowel cleanse to remove any remaining bacteria. Then 8 to 16 weeks, we're now doing daily capsules or powder. It contains roughly 400 species of gut bacteria, all the ones you'd have in a super healthy adult. Unlike typical probiotics, they're only like 1 to 10 species. So think of it this way, like a garden. If you have seeds for corn and beets, but you're trying to grow wheat, it's not going to work very well. So that's why we think this approach, we're using all 400 species. That's what you need to regrow all 400 species. Using just the seeds from one species or 1 to 10 species isn't going to help you regrow 400. So the benefit of this treatment is that when we stop treatment, not only do symptoms generally continue, but usually autism symptoms continue improving. What most parents just tell us is their child's better able to learn as time goes on. So this is just a plot showing GI symptoms at the beginning of treatment. In our first study of 18 kids had a major reduction in their GI symptoms by the end of treatment. 8 weeks post-treatment, now we're up to 17 of 18 kids had improved. 2 years post-treatment, the 18th child finally had an improvement in their child GI symptoms as well. But a few people did lose benefit, some from antibiotics, some from still being on a poor diet. But autism symptoms at the start of the study, 80% of the kids were in the severe range. Effect. But our expert autism evaluator said nearly 50% reduction in autism severity. And it was very safe. We've now treated over 100 children with autism, children and adults, and no serious side effects, no lasting side effects. We did a second study with $1 million, over $1 million from the federal government, several hundred thousand donated from autism families. This is a very rigorous, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. 56 adults participated, 51 completed the 7-month treatment study. So very high completion rate. It was very safe. The treatment group actually had fewer and less severe autism, have their good days and bad days. And those on treatment had fewer bad GI days, fewer bad autism days. It was very effective, a medium effect at 10 weeks, a larger effect at 18 weeks. And GI symptoms improved as well. And again, this was amazing that we could, to me, that we could treat these people who had had these GI symptoms since infancy for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But we think that we still probably underdosed. And so now we're optimizing the dose to see if higher dose may result in even more improvement. This is just a chart. The green is the treatment group. They improved some during the first 8 weeks. So they all started out in the severe range. They improved some during treatment. Another 8 weeks of treatment, they improved more. 6, 12, and 18 months later, after treatment had stopped, on average, they went from well into the severe range of autism down to the mild to moderate range for autism, on average. We had another group who received placebo initially, and then they received 8 weeks of treatment, but without pre-treatment with the antibiotic. And they did not improve as much. So this, it's pretty obvious looking at these two curves. Would you rather have treatment with vancomycin with 16 weeks or no vancomycin in 8 weeks? So this was a big clue as to how to improve our treatment. And still, we think we may be underdosing, and we're going to higher dosing now. In terms of the types of symptoms that improved, we saw, so green is the treatment group, orange is the placebo group. We saw 65% reduction in tantrums versus 30% for placebo. We also saw more improvement in every other symptom of the 20 symptoms we looked at for treatment versus placebo. More improvement in GI, but also aggression. Excuse me, serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine. So again, it's not a cure, but it's a substantial reduction. The quotes from the families, one father said he felt the treatment was foundational for his son. He seems happier and more well adjusted. He's less anxious, less OCD, more receptive to typical social interactions, including coaching, training. Troublesome behaviors and outbursts are much less frequent and less intense. Always had GI problems since he was a baby. The study was a miracle for him. No more pain, smell, or mess. More than we could have hoped for. And the bonus, his depression and anxiety levels are way down. So, how do we hope to get to FDA approval? We've done a study for a rare genetic condition called Pitt-Hopkins, which usually involves severe autism, severe intellectual disability, and even worse GI symptoms than an autism. Our first study was very successful. We did a second study. The FDA has awarded us orphan drug status. So now, with just that second study, because this is a rare condition, our second study will complete next spring. And then at that point, we're going to apply to the FDA and ask if we can have drug approval for Pitt-Hopkins, of MTT for Pitt-Hopkins. That will then make it easier to get drug approval for autism. As I said, we've already done 3 studies. We're now doing a dosing study. The treatment's so safe. Imagine if you had a headache, you took half an aspirin and it helped. Maybe you want to take another half of an aspirin, and because it seems safe, it might help more. So that's the stage we're at. Can we go to higher dose? And is it still safe? And is it perhaps even more helpful than what I've already showed you? Then our final stage is to run a phase 3 clinical trial, just like phase 2, randomized, double-blind, but it has to be much bigger, many more sites, much more expensive. So the small catch is we need to raise $20 million to do it, and we're about to announce a new stock sale next month to do that, to try to raise $20 million. I prefer to raise it from autism families, but if we have to raise it from venture capital funds, we'll do that. And then we'll run that study, and then we hope to eventually get FDA approval for autism. So that's roughly where we are now. There's a potential. The pharmaceutical industry is ridiculously profitable. And so we hope that most importantly, it's a chance to make a difference in your child's life, lives of millions of others. If you wish to join us, feel free to come to our company and learn more. Again, I'm trying not to make this a pitch. But just to summarize the whole talk now, thank you for your patience. You know, faculty like to talk. But bottom line is our evidence, 90% of kids with autism have extremely high, elevated levels of toxic metabolites from gut bacteria and yeast. There are over 40 studies backing this up on each individual metabolite. What we've done is we've measured those plus many more. We know these metabolites disrupt either dopamine or serotonin because they're made from the same building blocks as serotonin and dopamine. And by the way, most of your serotonin is made in your gut, roughly 90%. The test, I'm just so excited to say that we now have a test available in the UK, licensed from our company here in the US, that offers a combined gut health test to measure the levels of many of these metabolites, and families can order it directly from anywhere in the world. And we now have it, and soon we hope to, in a couple of weeks, we'll be announcing the diagnostic screen. Is this likely from a child with autism or likely from a typically developing child? In the same way that every child gets a heel prick the day they're born to check for 30 different rare diseases, we want to offer a urine test to every child in the US to screen them for autism before the symptoms manifest, to see if we can treat it early, get them into treatment early, behavioral therapies and other therapies early, because right now autism diagnosis often takes much too long. And finally, treatment. Our treatment seems very promising because it replaces harmful gut bacteria with beneficial bacteria. It improves GI symptoms and autism symptoms with benefits lasting years after treatment in most cases. But we do need to conduct at least one final major study, and we have only one barrier in our way, and so that's to raise our 20 million. So you can get more information about our company, about the test, and about our research at ASU, and my email is there as well. I want to thank the many, many autism families. Over 1,000 families have donated to our research. The funding we've received from the federal government, from ASU, from many other autism-related organizations, Pitt Hopkins, from our annual zoo walk in Arizona. And again, over 1,000 families have raised well over $1 million for us. Especially want to thank the over 100 autism families who have invested in our company, who have purchased stock in our company, our research team at ASU. I forgot to mention our colleagues at the University of Minnesota who make this very high quality product for us. They're the leading distributors for academic studies. They're supporting over a dozen different studies for many other gut-brain conditions. We want to thank our colleagues in Ludos who worked with me for 3 years to get the test to market. So with that, you have my one of my emails here. My ASU email is on my ASU website. But let me just go back to the summary and maybe just take questions from there. I don't think I can see the chat box while
That's
I'm in
okay. I
this
can,
mode.
yeah, I can go through them for you. Yeah, I think
Oh,
it's
I think I
sharing.
think I can see them, Olivia.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you see the chat box when I'm showing it in my screen now? I don't know if that's hiding the
No, I
screen or
think
not.
that, yeah, I think that's only visible to the individual.
Okay. So do you have any particular questions you want me to address, Olivia, or should I just go through them?
Uh, yeah, I mean, if you want to go through them, because I know some of them it looks like you may have answered already. Um,
Okay. Um, so someone asked, what are the 10 most elevated levels of bacteria and fungi? So there's a study by Morton that lists roughly 500 species that are elevated in children with autism and about 100 that are decreased. Um, I think it's important to understand that many bacteria have the same function, and we still have a lot to learn about the bacteria. For Clostridia, for example, there are good guys and bad guys. So even within Clostridia, it's been shown that if you have a C. diff infection, Sid Feingold showed that kids with autism have infection with a particular strain of C. diff that makes much more toxin than other strains. You have to even go beyond the species level down to the strain level to see which particular strain is producing these toxins. And even if you have the strain that produces it, it's like seeing a criminal with a gun. You don't know if they're firing the gun or not. So that's why we like to count bullets. We like to count toxins rather than seeing if they're holding a gun. We want to see, are they firing the gun? So that's why we do that. But if you shoot me an email, I'll give you the reference to the Morton study where they analyzed our data and many others and developed a list of over 600 abnormal microbiota in autism. Again, it's just incredibly varied from one child to another. What helps improve microbiome other than chewing food? Well, that's a good point. I forgot to mention that just by digesting your food, chewing your food a little bit better probably helps. Most of your gut bacteria are present in your colon. And so you want to digest your food early in your intestine. Your intestine is about 28 feet long. So we prefer to have foods that are digested early. You absorb most of your nutrients in your terminal ileum. That's your last part of your small intestine. And it's when food isn't digested and it gets down into the colon. That's when that's where most of the bacteria are. So yes, chewing your food also could help, although haven't seen any formal studies of that. What's your opinion on bacteriophage prebiotic products such as Pre4 Pro? I don't have an opinion yet. So just to explain, bacteriophages are viruses that specifically attack the bacteria. In our very first study, we looked at phages, but it's expensive to measure bacteria. It's dramatically more expensive to measure phages. We barely know what bacteria are useful. I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, we know enough about bacterial phages to know which are good and which are bad. So if someone has a study on that, I'd be curious, but I think we just don't know enough yet. Another question, our adult study has been seeing naturopaths to provide supplements to help with neurotransmitters. So the main way to improve your human neurotransmitters is through certain key vitamins like vitamin B6 and others. In our study of our vitamin supplement 15 years ago, we saw low levels on average of most neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, epinephrine, acetylcholine, and our vitamin mineral supplement was able to improve those because vitamins are key cofactors to the production of most of the major neurotransmitters. But the problem seems to be more the harmful metabolites that are serotonin-like or dopamine-like, the poisons that substitute for them. She's been on supplements for years. We don't think we're hitting the target. Of course, we'd love to have MTT when it's available. We'd love to give it when it's available. Do you recommend any types of doctors that specialize in treating? Well, it just turns out that in Phoenix, next week, I'm speaking at the MAPS conference. So I've been invited to speak there. MAPS stands for oh boy, it's on the tip of my tongue. Medical Academy for Pediatric Special Needs. So it's for physicians who focus on integrative treatments for autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. And so you can go to their website and they list physicians all around the country who've been to their conferences. And so that's probably a good place to start looking, depending on the part of the country you're in. Have we seen a pattern with pica and rumination associated with problems in children with autism? Yes. It's pretty well accepted that most cases of pica are due to a severe nutritional deficiency, usually a mineral deficiency like a zinc deficiency or an iron deficiency. In one of our studies of nutritional supplement, we found that when we had a child with severe pica, and they had some of the worst nutritional status and the lowest levels of vitamins and minerals of anyone in our study, but they couldn't handle our vitamin mineral supplement. But when they went to start our healthy allergen-free diet, within a week, they were cured of pica. I don't use the word cure lightly, so they just completely stopped that. So again, we think pica is usually a problem of a severe nutritional deficiency. You could try to treat it with supplements, but I think just a rainbow of foods is the right term to use, a wide range of vegetables, fruits, protein, etc. Can there also be a link with seizures? Ha 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 ha. Yes, because these bacteria are affecting your neurotransmitters. So there's a small study of people with epilepsy, not autism. They have even higher levels of p-cresol than kids with autism. So we strongly suspect that treatment here can have an effect. Most of our MTT studies, we've avoided enrolling kids with seizures, but we did enroll one child with Tourette's. And within about 8 weeks of treatment, they were cured of Tourette's. And again, I don't use the word cure lightly. So yes, we think that it's very likely. 80% of seizures, roughly, we don't know the cause. And I strongly suspect it's due to abnormal gut bacteria. We know that p-cresol can cause seizures in animals. So if it can cause seizures in animals, it's present at high levels in kids with autism. I think it's likely a contributing factor. In light of genetics, many genes that are epigenetic regulators are sensitive to butyrate. For example, Schwinn and colleagues have shown that chromatin and epigenetic gene variants converge on pathways. Yes, there's no doubt we need to go beyond just regular genetics to epigenetics. Some of these may affect also the gut barrier. Yes. Microbial tolerance. Yes. Could those genetic variants predispose people? Yes. One of the genetic variants I'm most concerned about is variants that affect sulfate deficiency that roughly, I forget the exact number now, but a high fraction of children with autism and some of their parents and siblings have a decreased ability to produce sulfate, which is the major route for detoxifying many things, including many of these gut toxins. But also, as I mentioned, toxins like P-cresol poison the mitochondria, which then causes oxidative stress, which causes other problems. And so we know that epigenetic differences can affect your methylation cycle, which is tightly coupled to oxidative stress. There's so much more I could say there, but let's move on. What food should be eliminated from diet? Well, it all depends on the person. In general, I'd get rid of junk food. I'd get rid of high sugars, simple starches. I'd focus on healthy vegetables, beans, fruits, and limited fruit because it has high sugar. And again, it's always the whole fruit because you want the fiber and good amount of protein. And go be cautious with the carbs. That's a general recommendation. But then some children just have an allergy. I mean, it's amazing, but a bite of a peanut can kill some people. Not that the peanut is poisonous, but the immune system made a mistake and thinks it's highly poisonous and launches a high attack against it. So the best way to deal with allergens is you can go and do food allergy testing. There are different types. We don't really have time to get into that. But the gold standard is just to remove a food, see if it improves symptoms, and then add it back in and see if it causes symptoms. And if so, that's a pretty major clue that for you, you need to avoid that food. Have you correlated the high levels of harmful metabolites with any root causes? No, we're working on doing that, but we just need more data to be able to try to do that. But we're looking at kids years after their symptoms were caused. And so it's kind of like looking at a person who's been hit by a truck and the truck is long gone. It's hard to know what hit them, but we can see the damage that's been done in the person. But there are many things that could contribute to these symptoms. But I think the central feature for most kids with autism is impaired gut function. I'm not saying it's the only problem, but I'm saying we now have evidence. It seems to be a major difference in kids with autism and is likely contributing to many of their symptoms. Someone says they've done our urine test with Andaludose. He has high levels of arabinitol. Arabinitol is a yeast metabolite. High levels of hippuric acid and DHPPA. DHPPA is a bacterial metabolite. So with high levels of arabinitol, we recommend talking with a physician about antifungal treatments and antifungal diets. With high levels of bacterial metabolites, there are many things to try that I've covered in this handout. Again, what we think is most effective is MTT, but it's not available yet. But still, there are many things to do in the meantime. Again, just trying to minimize constipation if that's an issue. But the many other things that I mentioned, changing diet, considering probiotics, they may have a small benefit. In general, with probiotics, it seems the multi-strains are slightly better. But again, we did the very best we could with customized probiotics, and it had just a very small benefit. Have you come across Pseudomonas or Josa in your studies? It's not one particular we remember off the top of my head, but there are so many. I mean, there are thousands literally, so I don't remember them all off the top of my head. Yeah, I have to be careful about giving too personal advice, but again, we do what we've done to help families interpret the Antiludos test, because I can't help interpret everyone, and I shouldn't because I'm a researcher, not a physician, is we have a consultant with our nonprofit ANRC, and so you can talk with them. I've trained them, and they can help you interpret the Antiludos test and let you know what are treatment options. But then in some cases, you'll need to follow up with a physician for those. When MTT gains FDA approval, will it look like a standardized treatment protocol? Yes, very much like what we've just recommended, I think. Seems to work well. Administered by a GP or specialist. Well, you just do it at your home. I mean, it's just take an antibiotic pill or liquid antibiotic at home. The bowel cleanse is the only hard part of it. If you've had a bowel cleanse for like a prep for going for a colonoscopy, it's just like that. So it's just liquid diarrhea for a few hours. It's not pleasant, but you get over it in a few hours. And then the probiotic or microbiota product, you can just swallow a capsule or just mix it with a little bit of milk or yogurt and swallow it. You can do all of that at home. It's very simple. It's just very powerful. Can't wait to do the test for Manoludose. Do you know how this may relate to bipolar? We're fascinated. We are working in a study to measure many other cases because in kids with autism, we've seen improvements in anxiety, in depression, in ADHD, and there's been a study at the University of Calgary on microbiota transplant for people with anxiety, for people with bipolar, for people with depression, and they're seeing improvements there from microbiota transplant in their research studies. So yes, I think it's very likely that there's a subset. I don't know how big the subset is, but there's probably a substantial subset of people with those mental health conditions that are affected. And so we're now doing a research study. We're hoping to gather samples from many children with those conditions, children with anxiety, with depression, etc., and measure them in Manoludose and see where do they fall in. Are they halfway between autism and controls, or do they have a different pattern? So we still have so much more to learn. Does colon hydrotherapy change the microbiome bacteria? Certainly there'll be some temporary change. The problem is even when you do a bowel cleanse, there's still a biofilm, a layer of bacteria left. So it may be an analogy to a garden. It's like cutting off the stem, but the roots are still there. So you'll still have a biofilm in your gut even after our best bowel cleanse. Also, your appendix, it seems the major function for the appendix actually is to reseed the gut after an illness. So if you get some nasty bacterial infection, your body's natural response is to have diarrhea to flush it out, to get rid of it. Diarrhea is a good thing to get rid of it. And then you're with your original healthy gut bacteria. So will colon hydrotherapy help? Maybe temporarily, but again, it's unlikely it's going to get very far, but I'm not an expert on it. I know you were applying for a grant. Yes, we're always applying for grants. We are waiting for them. But mostly it looks like we'll see. I'll just leave it at that. Do coffee enemas help? I'm not familiar with a coffee enema. Again, regular enemas, yes. I'm not familiar with coffee enemas. So shoot me an email. I can check with our gastroenterologist. Does your research show that Candida albicans overgrowth plays a significant role in the production of these metabolites? Absolutely, yes. The study we did 15 years ago showed that Candida albicans is the most common type of yeast infection, but not the only one. I did a lot of research on it. I really should publish a paper on it sometime. But basically, Candida produces a toxin to destroy the main part of your immune system in your gut. So Candida albicans destroys secretory IgA, which is the body's main defense against yeast. So Candida probably for decades. That's why we believe, and when we measured kids with autism who had yeast infections, they had low levels of secretory IgA. So that's why we think it's so hard you have to treat for probably a very long time for the secretory IgA to slowly reestablish itself so it can then fight off these infections. So we think that's a very major problem. Olivia, just let me know when you want me to stop. Um, I know we've been going a while and still it looks like we have a lot of questions. I'm sorry
Yeah,
I'm so wordy.
that's okay. I
Um,
would say if you want to do like two more and then we can just wrap it up. And then anybody that has additional questions, we would encourage them to reach out to you or check out the links that you provided here at the bottom.
yeah, and let me just put my own email here, so my ASU email as well. So you can email me through our company or through ASU. Again, I'm a researcher, not a physician. I can't give medical advice, but I can give general feedback. Um, let's see, where were we? I think I may have skipped a question or two. How is our treatment different from fecal transplant? Fecal transplant was originally done with raw stool, just taking raw poop and putting it in a person. And usually it was just one or two treatments. Our treatment is different in that in several ways. We pre-treat with vancomycin to kill off harmful bacteria. It seems very important. For conditions like C. diff, 1 to 2 doses is plenty. For autism, it seems we need to treat daily for months, several months. And finally, for C. diff, almost anyone can be a donor. For autism, it really matters. We use the top few percent healthiest Americans, and even then, it really matters who the donor is. So we're still researching that. Question about fiber supplements can be used in case of SIBO and dysbiosis. I would be very cautious about using them in cases of SIBO or dysbiosis. That again, I think high fiber diet is great for preventing these problems, but once you have these problems, it doesn't seem that they're very effective in preventing it because often these fiber supplements feed the good and the bad bacteria. Some studies suggest that single source fibers, like just inulin alone, could be unhealthy. And so using my favorite type of fiber is eating your fruits and vegetables, high fiber sources, and beans and whole grain foods. So I think that's the best way to get fiber. And if your child can't eat it, you can make a smoothie of it and with the whole fruit, the whole vegetable. That's what I do. Okay, so I'm sorry we've run out of time, but feel free to email me any questions. Olivia and the Autism Society will make this uh, recording available. Olivia, maybe you could tell everyone how it's going to be available.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for everybody for joining us today, and especially to Dr. Adams for providing us all this wonderful information. I know you guys still have a lot of questions, and that's really great. So I would encourage you to reach out to him and check out those resources. We're going to let Zoom do its thing and process everything, and then hopefully, probably by tomorrow, we will send out the link, but we'll also share it on our social media as well as on our YouTube page. That way you have somewhere to directly access it all the time. So yeah, we thank everybody so much for joining us. Again, thank you so much to Dr. Adams. Dr. Adams, do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom you want to share?
I'd just like to put in a small plug for the Autism Society. When I moved to Arizona over 25 years ago, it was the first place I came to, and they were very helpful. Even before I moved, they were very helpful giving me advice on the services there. And I just want to encourage everyone to consider making a donation to them. We have a tax credit in Arizona, so it costs you nothing to give of order 800, I forget the exact amount each year. Thanks, Olivia.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and join us next time for further community trainings and events and whatnot. Make sure to visit our website at phxautism.org to sign up for more information and just learn about all the other great things we do. So thank you so much, and we hope to meet you in person one day. Have a great rest of your day.